why is it that trauma gets encoded in the body?
Right.
And
Exactly.
really, it's a survival mechanism. So what happens when we have a trauma or like a difficult experience? Because for some people, they hear the word trauma and it's like big T trauma, domestic violence, war. But trauma can be, a loss of a parent, a dissolution of a partnership, what have you. Traumas don't have to be some, big thing. But they are. I don't want to minimize it. But when you have a trauma, what happens is your brain sort of drops into survival mode. And when it does that, we take that sort of thinking, executive functioning, reasoning part of your mind out of the picture. That's the prefrontal cortex. I don't want to get too jargony, but that thinking part of our mind is not the most important part. We want to drop down into the amygdala, into that survival, those subcortical structures, because what do you want? You want to be able to respond quickly. If there's a tiger chasing you, you don't want to think about it. You just want your body to do something. And that's a normal process. But what happens then is when you have trauma, it doesn't get encoded as an explicit memory in the mind. It actually gets stored in the body. And oftentimes it gets trapped there if you don't find a way to discharge that. And so then when something comes up to trigger in the future, what happens is you don't remember it as a past event. It feels like you're experiencing it now. You see this a lot in people with PTSD. It's like, because your limbic system, that part of your survival brain that you drop into, it actually can't tell time. And so when you're triggered, it feels like you're in it real time. You're having that same experience. And so in conventional medicine in the last, since Freud in the 1800s, there's been more of this focus on talk therapy. And there's this great quote by Bessel van der Kolk, I'm going to butcher it, but essentially he says that the rational mind is impotent to change what's happening in our emotional experience. Like, we can't talk ourselves out of this shit that's happening in our bodies, and it gets trapped. And so we have to find ways to get out of there.
Are you familiar with the Shakers? They're like, I think, an offshoot of the Quakers. You ever heard of these cats? So I had so they shake. Just that I think it maybe sort of like Sufis spin. The Shakers would shake. I'm also bastardizing this, but I say this because I had an experience with mushrooms once, where my buddy was really going through a hard time, and I said I'd sit with him. This is back in 2010 or something, 2011. I was really in a deep depression myself, really struggling. And we get into the journey, and I noticed I'm just sitting there with him, and I felt like a tremor in my legs. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to let this shake for a while. Just let it shake. And I started shaking, just sitting there and shaking for a while. And I felt I had gone through a really difficult bicycle accident twice. This was the second time. And, you fall on your bike, horribly broke my arm, and you're just lying there. And then an ambulance comes, they put you on a stretcher, they take you into a hospital, you go to do surgery, and you never move, really. And all this stuff was stored up in me, but I didn't understand it. I couldn't think about it, but it was in there. And I just noticed that after this journey and this shaking session, I kind of I did turn a corner. That was a turning point. I slowly started to come out of the depression weeks upon weeks. And looking back on it, I was like, maybe those Shakers, because I heard about these folks, they're onto something. I wonder too if the Quakers, I'm serious, if the Quakers used to quake more, and that kind of, it's a vestige maybe that got dropped, and now they sit in that beautiful silence. But anyway, there's something about shaking, like animals do that. Dogs do it all the time. They get a little spooked, they just shake it off, and they're good. And you see an animal, a cheetah's chased, a cheetah's usually chasing, and if they get away, they shake.
Yep.
So what happened to us? Why don't we know how to shake anymore?
Yeah. Well, actually, what you've described is what is the third and normal stage of a traumatic event. So whenever you have trauma, there's three things that are supposed to happen right away. Well, not right away, but in this process. Number one, you become aroused. So your brain goes on high alert. Your amygdala, things get smoky, and your brain's like, what's going on? And then you mobilize. You create a response to it. And then the third thing that's supposed to happen is discharge. Literally, you shake it off. And you're right. You see animals do it all the time. But what happens with humans, I think maybe more so than other species, because of our thinking mind, we create these narratives around the experience, and we tend to like re-trigger. Anyway, things get stuck in the body, and we're not getting to that stage of discharge because people are getting stuck in this danger fight or flight response, and we don't get there. And the Sufis, the Shakers, pendulation. This is something that you see little autistic kids doing this, or
Uh-huh.
it's actually a strategy that's used in somatic experiencing, pendulation, right? We've all had that trip experience where it's like, man, I just can't stop doing this. I've recently added more movement to my meditation practice, and I actually feel like I'm getting deeper.
Wow, it's crazy you say that. I noticed that I do that when I play music in certain moments. I find myself, doing that. Like, it's like I love that term, pendulation. It feels like a wave, right? And, in essence, all of life and existence in this dimension is a form of a wave, a I'm not trying to be
Frequency,
hippie, but it
right?
literally is atoms moving around. Everything's in some kind of oscillation and movement. And so, in some ways, a lot of this is about stagnation versus flow.